Welcome to Podcast Tactics. In this episode, you will learn how to create a podcast that makes a difference in people's lives in a very deep and meaningful way. Today's guest understands the power of voice in the most profound way. I can't wait for you to hear her story. Hello, I'm James, the host and creator of Podcast Tactics. This is the show where you will learn how to podcast from other podcasters. I get you inside tips, tricks, and advice for starting, launching, and growing a successful podcast. In today's show, I had the honor of interviewing Vera-Lee, an extraordinary podcaster from Australia. She shares an incredible story that leads to the creation of her show. In addition to this, you'll want to listen in to hear Vera-Lee's podcasting advice, including her powerful method for attracting audience listeners. Before we get into this episode, I invite you to please join the mailing list at podcasttactics.com to get news and notifications when new episodes are posted. Now, let's get into it. Joining me right now is author, artist, speaker, and survivor Vera-Lee from Australia. Vera-Lee, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me on today, James, and hopefully I can bring some value to your audience. I'm very honored to be a guest on your show.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. Let's start from the beginning. What is the name of your podcast and what's it all about?
Absolutely. I actually have two podcasts. The podcast that I'll talk about today is the Why Me with Vera-Lee podcast series. And this is a series where I bring guests on to talk about their deep, dark, challenging why me moments in their life. And what we do is we focus on the opportunities that people have discovered and stepped into through adversity. And so it's about understanding and honoring those difficult times in their lives and then working out how they have focused on how to get through the adversity and make the most of their personal growth and how to continue that through community growth as well, with sharing their stories and their tips and tricks on how they've worked through that adversity.
You know, it's an absolutely amazing show that you're putting together. I mean, it's impactful, and this is one of the reasons why I'm very excited to have you on, because it's a show that makes a difference in people's lives in a very, very deep and meaningful way. And I'm curious, and forgive me if I'm prying, but what is the origins of this show? Where does that come from for you?
Fantastic question. The Why Me podcast wasn't actually in my sphere of consciousness until around August 2020. What my experiences in life have been is an awful lot of adversity. And through each of the different types of adversity I've gone through, which included nearly dying 17 times, I have one particular moment that I walk people through, and it's actually one of the moments I talk about in my trailer, where I had a life-saving treatment to paralyze one of my vocal cords, to keep my airways open, to keep me breathing, to keep me alive. And this was due to a condition I have called vocal cord dysfunction. And in that moment, within 24 hours of having this life-saving treatment, my vocal cords had swollen so much that I was suffocating and dying. And I was in a car on my way to a rural town, nowhere near a hospital. And I was dying, literally dying in the car. And I could feel my body shutting down. And this was not the first time that I had been suffocating. However, this was the first time that I knew I had no reserves left to fight this. And so here I was in a car with my dad, supposed to be receiving this wonderful change that, my airways were finally open, and the opposite was happening. And I was asking for, not the first time in my life, I can tell you, why me? Why was this happening to me? I felt like I was a good person. I was trying to do my best in the world. I had survived up until that point 16 near-death experiences. And here I was, when I was supposed to be at the best moment of my life, actually in the worst condition of my life. And so I was put into an induced coma, which was a very, very risky procedure to do for somebody in my physical state for many different reasons. And I allowed them to make that decision for me because I knew that I could no longer fight this on my own and I needed that extra help. And so when I woke up from that coma, I discovered that was a coma I was never meant to survive. Really, nobody expected that I could have. And it really was a last resort to try and keep me here on this earth. And so for me, when I woke up, and I saw the blue of the sky, and I saw how deep that blue was and how that spoke into my soul. When I saw the green of the trees and how vibrant that made me feel on the inside. When I immersed myself in the warmth of the sun and the comfort that I felt from that experience, I'd never felt comfort to that level before. I realized that nothing in the world had changed except for my perspective, that I was here, I was given a second chance, and I knew that I had so much to offer the world. That was the last time I asked myself, why me, from that victim mindset? And that was when I came up with the concept of the Why Me movement, helping other people through sharing our stories, all of our stories of overcoming these deep, difficult challenges in our lives and sharing the tips and tricks. And so that is where the Why Me movement was born. And yet, because of my condition, because of my life and where I was at, and just trying to survive and get through and be a single mum at the same time and raise a child and do all these different things, I wasn't actually able to put the movement into action publicly for quite some time. And so last year, in around April, I decided it was time to be public. I decided it was time to let this movement unleash into the world and to allow people the opportunity to be part of this significant movement, to help themselves and each other, to learn the ways that we can see opportunity within adversity. And the podcast was a natural extension of how to do that and allow people to come on and share their stories.
I mean, that is absolutely, if this is an understatement, that is an absolutely incredible story. The fact that it stems from your vocal cords and you're doing a podcast there's some poetic meaning in there that I can't do justice to
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that is absolutely inspiring. And the you said it a couple of times, uh, finding the opportunity in the adversity is so, so powerful. I mean, to go through, I believe you said 17 near-death experiences and to come
Correct.
out the other side of that and say, I'm not gonna be a pessimist or I'm not gonna complain or, like to look at the
Yeah.
opportunity and see the actual beauty in the world to
Mm.
continue to, I don't want to say fight because you transformed it and you're just looking at the possibility, right?
Yeah, look, I did transform it, but I do need to say, I do honor the fight. There is definitely a fight
Okay.
there, and there are days that I wake up now that I struggle because I still have this respiratory condition. And I would like to add, you very poignantly said there, this interesting concept that here I am using my voice in a podcast to communicate such a powerful and inspiring message with other people. I include other people in this. My guests are as much a part of this movement as I am. What happened when I woke up from that coma? I couldn't speak for 2 years
Oh,
because my vocal cords were paralyzed, and that was the point of that procedure, was to paralyze it so that my airway would stay open. And so continuing those treatments, and yes, I had to go back and have more of that same treatment, even knowing what had happened. That was a fight for me. I all of a sudden was in this world and I knew I had so much to say. I knew that I could be the catalyst for other people to be sharing the power of their stories. And yet I had no voice. It was like, how is this going to happen?
yeah.
And yet here we are. And I do understand the power of voice. I do understand the resonance of those vibrations. And I encourage people, when you are listening to podcasts, turn the volume up a little bit, run it through a good speaker system if you have one, to really feel those vibrations. There is such power in the human voice and the cadence of how we use our voices.
Mm. It's just it's giving me chills to hear your voice right now, just kind of knowing that backstory of yours. And your voice is very, it's beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you.
Usually I ask people at this point in the show what types of challenges that you run into with podcasting. I mean, I do want to know, but I just want to acknowledge the fact that it seems almost silly to ask this question on the back of such a powerful story. But I do want to know because you are putting
Absolutely.
together a podcast and you're human. So,
Yes,
what kind of challenges have you ran into with putting your podcast together, and how have you broken through
absolutely.
them?
Yeah. Well, the very first challenge I had was, well, I've got this idea. I want to do this podcast. How do I do it? What equipment do I need? How do I go about getting the podcast out there on different platforms? I'd been a consumer of podcasts for a very long time. I didn't have the first clue about how to set one up, how to record it, how to distribute it, and all of those things. So, the first thing I did was I went and sought out a teacher, a coach who would help me to learn those skills. And so I did become part of a podcasting group. This was a paid group. I invested in the process. And for me, that was a really important thing because once you invest money into a process, or you invest yourself, you invest that commitment, you do get so much more out of it because you don't want to waste that investment that you've put in. And so for me, that was the start of it. I already knew the concept of what the show needed to be. I just needed to work out the how and the materials. And so, luckily for me, I had a son who was here. Actually, this microphone I'm using is technically his. We've done a bit of a swap because I bought another microphone and it really wasn't great. So I was like, do you reckon I can use yours? I think I'll sound more like myself with his microphone. And we tested it out. And I'm like, yeah, this is now mine and you can have the other one. So that's all good. But yes, I got him to help me with that. I think the biggest challenge for me has been that, yes, I do still have health issues. I am working through those every single day in different ways. I work full time. So outside of my podcasting, I'm an office manager. So I'm out there working full time every single day. When I started the podcast, I was working from home. And so that afforded me a little extra time that I wouldn't normally have to put this into action. However, I didn't realize what a phenomenon this was going to create. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew the impact I wanted to create through this movement. I didn't realize how much of an impact globally this was going to have. And so I had people lined up for months on end, booking these schedules for interviews. And I was being a single parent to a child who was in his last year of school. We were both on home arrest because of COVID. So neither of us were allowed out. And that was because of protecting me being in a high risk category with my medical conditions. We had, I had my job. And so I was going through that. I was doing all of these things I was managing. And on top of it, we did 55 interviews in a 3-month period. Now, it took me about 4.5 months to release them all, but it was a 3-month period. I had major surgery in there as well.
Oh
And
my
this is where
goodness.
my second podcast comes in called What the Flab. So I had weight loss surgery to help me with, which was a long-term plan that we finally were able to get done during last year in November. And so, I was going through all of this stuff, recovery. There was just so much going on. And yet I was recording all of these interviews. Some of these interviews were going for 3-4 hours because when you get deep with people and people give you permission, or I give permission for people to be vulnerable and transparent, my goodness, the conversation just flows. And there was so much good stuff in there. And so a lot of conversations were going very long time. I wasn't getting much sleep and I was heading towards burnout. And I recognized that. And I said, you know what? As much as everyone wants this right now, I need to create a schedule that is going to work for me as well. I need to look after myself. And I had a couple of weeks in there where I completely lost my voice. So I wasn't even able to do recordings. And so they are some of the challenges that I've had on the way and are still working through now.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's what I'm getting from excuse me. What I'm getting from that is striking the balance. I mean, the surgery is one thing, but
Yeah.
working on top of that and taking on so many interviews in such a compacted amount of time. I did notice that too. Your catalog starts September 2020, September 2020, and there is a massive backlog of episodes in there. And I want you just explained. I was going to ask you how that happened, and you explained it,
Yeah.
and I was just amazed. You're actually all of my interviews today. I have three. Everybody started in September of 2020
Did
this year
they?
or last year, and they all have these
Interesting.
massive catalogs. Like
Yeah.
it's totally random. These people that call, that have contacted
Yeah.
me and booked these interview. All three of you guys are amazing. So yeah.
There you go.
Well, let's look at, thank you for sharing the challenges. I mean, that's brave. I want to ask you about successes with your podcast. Can you share some of
Mm.
those? I mean, I'm imagining you've had quite a few.
Absolutely. Well, we're currently sitting in the top 2.5% of all podcasts, which I think is incredible for not even being 6 months old.
Yeah.
And that is a score from Listen Notes. We have at least 200 unique visitors every single week that are
Wow.
tuning in. The downloads are growing. And the only reason I mention those things is that it is evidence of me that people are loving this content. And the success for me personally, on a personal level, I'm getting to connect with some of the most amazing human beings that most of you will have never heard of. And one of the things that somebody said to me right at the start was, "What celebrities are you going to get on?" And my approach at the start was, well, at this point, I don't want celebrities. And although I've always professed that everybody, despite what status they hold in society, everybody is first and foremost a human being. And I connect to people on that level. It doesn't matter what title they hold, I connect to somebody as to who they are. And yet I was very conscious of not going for the big names, not going for, I want this person right up front, because my audience are predominantly ordinary people, as I am, as you are. We are all ordinary people. And it is what we do with our lives that makes us extraordinary. And so the focus on having everyday people come onto the show talking about their adversity and how they've worked through and become extraordinary in simply sharing and being who they are. That was what I really wanted the focus to be on. And for me, I have met just some of the most incredible people through this experience. And as the podcast grows, everybody else who is sharing and saying, "Hey, I've heard this podcast from Vera-Lee. I think you would really like it." Everybody's getting so much out of it. And the three pillars that we focus on is the ICE acronym. We focus on inspiration. We focus on connection so that people know they're not alone. Although everyone's unique experiences are their own, we have so many commonalities through adversity that we go through in life, and we focus on empowering people. And with my guests sharing their stories, these are the three things that my audience always has on offer to accept if they're willing to want to accept that and take on board those tips and tricks that they hear during these interviews and feel that connection like I do with the guests.
I've never heard that acronym before, the ICE. I love that. I'm stealing it.
Good.
What is one piece of advice? I know. What is one piece of advice that you would give somebody who is thinking about starting a podcast, or they're new to it and they're just kind of trying to find their way around this wonderful thing that we do?
Mm. Be authentically you, your vision, what you want to put out to the world. If your podcast is focused on what your vision and passion is, then you will succeed because you will make it succeed. You will be invested. Again, I use that word because investing in ourselves is important to be able to then invest in other people and allow them to invest in you. And so being authentically you is the one piece of advice I give people. And to be honest, I was given advice by lots of different people when I said, "Hey, I'm starting this podcast." And they would tell me ways to interview. They would tell me ways to be. They would tell me things to focus on. And apart from that group that I did invest in, which I found fabulous in every possible way because they gave me the permission to do it the way I wanted to,
Mm.
I certainly found that sticking true to what I wanted and I knew that I could do. I'm not a trained journalist, I'm not a trained interviewer. And yet, being me that has been the key to the success of both the movement and the podcast itself. And that is what people are responding to, both my guests and the listeners. And so, again, I understand what it is to be stepping into your authentic space and how that helps you to stay true to what it is that you want to do. And then this is why people will come to find you when they understand that what you are giving is uniquely you.
That's gold. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's talk a little bit about, well, before actually we start talking about the episode that I listened to, I went deep into your back catalog. I actually went to the beginning, about as
Yes.
deep as one could go, I guess. I didn't
Yes.
listen to your trailer, although I wish I did now. But anyway, I listened to the, what caught my eye were the bonus episodes, or I think you called them the launch snippets. Because I'm kind of in
Yes.
that phase of my launch of my podcast. So I'm selfishly looking at your catalog going, what did she do?
Go
Right.
for it.
And I'm just gonna say I'm ripping off the idea of the launch snippets. Just little
Mm,
bonus episodes, a few minutes long. That was such a great thing. It gave your listeners, your audience, a really good flavor of like what's coming up, which is fantastic because it really did set your audience up for, yeah, this is
yeah.
impactful and meaningful. Did that come from the group? Did you just kind
Mm.
of stumble on that on your own? Go ahead.
Yeah, that was definitely part of that training that I invested in. And so, I openly talk about that training because for me, I'm totally honest. I had no idea where to go, how to do this. And although I'd been consuming podcasts, I wasn't in the space and I didn't have the time personally to go and do all of that research myself. And so I
Yeah.
said, well, what's the next best thing? I go see the people who do this day in, day out, who
Yeah.
have already created the blueprint. And so that was one of their things. There was a whole lot more in the launch strategy, and that was one part of it. And even that, though, I did a little differently to how they taught it. They taught it that they would be probably maximum of 6 minutes. There was a certain formula to do it. And yet, and I discussed this with them, and this is why I love that particular training, because we were on a Zoom call a couple of times a week together with the trainers, with the rest of the people going through that training. And so that we were all discussing the process as we were doing it. And I will encourage you to go and listen to that trailer, James, because when you hear this story and then you listen to the trailer, you'll understand. With my launch episodes, I didn't feel that I could honor my guest stories by sticking to that formula. And so I created about 10, 11-minute snippets as my bonuses. And I didn't, again, do it quite in the way that they said, but I did it the way that worked for both my guests and my story and my feel of my show. In the same line of thinking, a podcast trailer is often usually between 1.5 to maybe 2.5 minutes. So you keep them quite short so that people can hear it, really quickly get the feel of what your podcast is about. For me, I knew that at the basis of everything that the movement was based on, everything and reason why the podcast came to life at all was to do with my adversities and specifically my breathing and specifically the fact that I still have a voice, the fact that I have lived in that why me for so many years through all of my adversities, and the moment that changed everything, the moment where I stopped asking that question, why me, and I started declaring, this is why me. And I was a little hesitant to add my breathing onto that trailer because I know how confronting it is for people who haven't lived it personally, how confronting it is to witness or hear somebody struggling to breathe.
Hmm.
And yet, I had a discussion with my group. I played them the voice memo, which I recorded on my phone of me breathing one night. And that was recorded in September 2020. This is not like when I was in that coma. This is not like when I was at my worst. This is an everyday thing for me. Breathing at night is not easy. And so I played it for them, and I had given them preamble. I said, look, I'm not sure. I don't want to turn people off. I don't want them to hear the trailer and go, oh my gosh, I can't hear that. That's triggered me. And they all heard it and unanimously said, Vera, This is your story. This is what everything is about. You need to put it in. And so I trusted them and I trusted myself, and it's in the trailer. And I do encourage everyone to go and have a listen because it really is very powerful, but it sets the scene and it explains to people why I started the podcast, why I started the movement, and how it is that I do what I do, how I hold the space for my guests, and then the feeling generally of what it is that people get out of the Vera-Lee experience.
So I did listen to an episode of your show. It was the child sexual abuse stories from every perspective with Debbie Koval Locken, I believe is how you pronounce her
Yes.
name.
Yes,
I
correct.
mean, incredible story, you know, incredible interview. I'm not going to give, any spoilers about it. It's all, all of your all of your episodes I'm sure are just as compelling as that one is.
Yeah.
I do want to go
Yeah.
back to the beginning of your catalog and just, binge listen. What I do want to ask you about is two things. One, how do you get guests? Two, how do you prepare for your interviews?
Mm, very good questions. How do I get guests? Through connection. So on Facebook, when I started, there's a few podcast groups that you can go in, which are, podcasters seeking guests or wanting to be speakers on other podcasts. And I would read people's posts and I would start to connect with them first. For me, it's about the connection. So if I connected to their story, if they were sharing something that was very deep and meaningful to them that fit, the adversity and how they've made something of the adversity, how they're helping themselves and helping other people through those experiences, then I would initiate connection and we'd look to set up an interview from there. These days, I probably get more people from Podit and Clubhouse than anything else. And Clubhouse for me has been an amazing platform. It is a platform a lot of podcasters are on. Because I work full time, I'm not on there as often as I would like. But I've made some amazing connections. And in fact, the last 4 guests that I've interviewed just over this weekend have been all from Clubhouse. It gives you that opportunity again to connect with people. And it's a little more direct than messaging because you're instantly talking to somebody in real time. So that's how I find my guests. Now I'm finding guests are finding me. So I have a lot of people that have heard the show, being recommended by other guests. And I also always ask my guests who come on, is there someone that you recommend? Having gone through the experience of being interviewed by me, do you have somebody that you would recommend that would be a good fit for this show? So they're the ways that I find guests. The second question was, how do I prepare for these interviews? Possibly differently to a lot of other people. So I now do pre-pod chats, and that is so that I can connect to the guest over Zoom, so I can look at them, I can speak to them directly, and I can give them the format of the show, but more in, I can talk to them about what it is that we focus on the show. Because for me, it's very important for everybody, as in myself and my guest, to be on the same page about the values that we're bringing the audience. And that's how we keep the consistency of the show. That's why the message is being shared is so powerful, because we're all working towards the common goal. We're all working towards seeing and communicating those opportunities again in the adversity and the way that we think about life and the way that we approach the choices that we make. I try not to have too much information about my guests. And
Oh,
I do a lot of research. Absolutely. I write all of my own intros. I do a lot of research into who they are as a person, what they stand for, what good work they're doing, but into their why me moment and their story. I try not to know too much information about that. And I'll explain why. Because when I am interviewing my guest, I want to be experiencing that for the first time. I want this to be the first time that I've really connected to that story, to them in that space, to those feelings. And this is what gets communicated through the interviews. And that way, I'm authentically reacting to my guest. My guest is authentically reacting to me. I prepare certain questions at the start so that my guests can get a little bit of a warm up to who the guest is. My audience, so that my audience can get a little bit of a warm up and feel a little more connected to my guest before we drop into those deep moments. But after that, The conversation flows. I do not prepare questions for the actual interview itself. I simply listen, react authentically, allow my audience to do the same and to be part of that discovery and exploration as I go. And then I will ask questions either from what I want to know or what I know that my audience will want to know from my guests. And so the conversation just flows. And that's the way that works for me and the guests as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. What is it that you want people to get out of your show? Why should they listen to your podcast?
Yeah. To feel inspired, to feel hope, to know that no matter how dark life gets, and I have had guests on there talking about wanting to jump off cliffs and commit suicide. I have had people go through the most intense moments of grief. I have had people on there that have just been through so much adversity that it's difficult to imagine and understand what that would be like. And yet, every single one of them has found something to be hopeful for, some way to get themselves back onto this experience that we call life, to jump back into the journey, to understand the perspective that even though each of our experiences are uniquely our own, that we do have a commonality here, that we can support each other to get through these difficult times. And so that's where the inspiration comes from sharing those stories. And I've always said from a very, very long time ago that everybody has a story if we're willing to listen. And I provide that space where I'm willing to listen and I invite my audience to do the same. The connection comes from being able to experience that discovery of our guest stories, to know that they're not alone in this world, and to know that things are possible, even if you can't see it in the moment. So, we talk a lot about working in and through adversity. The through part is really important because we don't always get to see the value that we can in hindsight when we're in the thick of those moments. And the empowerment comes from the tips and tricks that my guests will drop about how they've gotten through their adversity, and that my audience can pick up on those. And basically, it's an invitation to say, hey, if this worked for you, maybe next time I'm in that situation, it'll work for me too.
That is wonderful. Let's let's hop into a time machine. It's time machine time. I mean, your show is less than a year old. I mean, I think it's verging on 6 months
Mhm.
ish. Let's go a year or two down the road. What are your hopes for your podcast?
To continue on the path that we're currently on, producing more material. And I personally would like to be on more stages. And so as I'm doing with you, James, I'm getting onto other podcasts so that I can share the importance of this movement and the message so that these stories can be honored. And, I'm not limiting myself. And so I do see a bigger vision for the podcast. Yes, it has only started. Yes, it's already doing extremely well. I only see it growing more and more, and that more people will step into this movement and feel a part of it and be actively involved in helping the rest of the world. And this is a global movement. And this is what I've loved about the podcasting. I am in so many different countries right now. If anyone had asked me even, I'd say 8 months ago, it wasn't even on my radar. I wasn't considering doing this. And yet I've rolled with it. I was like, this is an opportunity. I'm going with it. This works. This makes sense to me. And so I just see it growing and growing. And again, getting into more people's ears, more people's hearts, and providing them what they need out of the show. And the same for my other podcasts, the What the Flab. It's all about, well, that one's specifically on weight loss with and without surgery. But again, it's all about connection. It's all about giving people the tools that they want and need to get through life in the best way possible for them.
My next question, this is a canned question that I like to ask, and I know how you feel about
Yes.
celebrities. So normally I say, is there a celebrity or a famous person that you would be floored to hear that they are listening to your show? But let me phrase it like this
Yes.
for you. Is there somebody of significance or, somebody,
Mm.
whatever, that's more significant than us, I guess, that you would be like, wow, okay, that's cool. They're listening to my show. I'm flattered.
Mm. I'm okay with the way you phrased it both ways.
Okay.
I spoke to my dad and I asked my dad to come on the show. And he hasn't done it yet, only because they've been away and there's been all these other things going on. He's been an extremely influential person to me in so many aspects of my life, and so has my mum. And I think the reason I chose my dad is because so many things that I talk about on the show relate to specific situations, experiences, and things that I have had happen with my dad. At the same time, there are celebrities that I would love to know either listening to my show or would love to come on for a guest or to have me on as a guest on their show. I'm talking about people that I resonate with personally. And we all have role models, right? So for me, people like Simon Sinek, Brenda Burchard, Dean Graziosi, these are people that have shaped my own personal development. And there are plenty, plenty more. I would love to have those people on first and foremost as a human being, status aside. So I still stick that status would be irrelevant to me from that point of view. It's because I value the contribution they give to the world as a human being.
Vera-Lee, please tell us where people can learn more about you and your podcast.
Absolutely. So I'm on social media at Vera-Lee Original, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. They're the main ones. Clubhouse, again, Vera-Lee Original, or I'm also known as Why Me Girl there. And we have a website under development at the moment, which will be out in the next couple of weeks at whymemovement.com.
I will definitely get all of that information for you to put into our show notes for this episode so that people have easy access to all of that and they can get in touch with you and follow you. Vera-Lee, I want to keep in touch. I want to catch up with you 6 months down the road. Please, I want to make this happen. I want to see where you're at. You know, if you have time for an interview with me, I would love to make that happen again, just so we can share again and we can get more into this. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like I can keep going with you.
Yeah.
But I'm a fanboy, you know, I'm gushing here. I'm going to let you
I can
answer
see that, James.
my request. You know, I'll let you answer
The funny
my
thing
request.
is,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, definitely. The funny thing is the audience on the podcast won't see your reaction here, but I can see that. And I say thank you. It does mean a lot to me. And every single person who listens on the show, podcaster or not, it's important to me that what we're doing makes an impact. And I will absolutely make the time to come back on your show in 6 months. Absolutely. Thank
I
you so much for
appreciate that. I mean, I feel
offering.
so honored to be a part of your story, or at least a little bit of it, you know, and I feel honored to, you know, help in some way to, you know, spread that message and that impact that you're having on the world. It's a really is an honor. And I feel like this is the power of the medium of podcasting. What you're up to is the possibility that can be put out in the world through this medium. So thank you for doing what you do, because it makes a difference.
You're welcome. Thank you for acknowledging that.
The name of the show is Why Me with Vera-Lee. Vera-Lee, I can't thank you enough for coming on and spending just a few moments to have a chat with me. It means so much to me.
Thank you, James. And the honor is reciprocated. I did mean what I said when I said thank you so much for having me on. I am honored to be on your stage. I appreciate what you're doing and what you're bringing your audience. And sharing is caring. For anybody who is listening on your audience, I encourage them, if they're getting benefit out of your show, which they will be, to share that with their friends, because when we share, that is how we again further connect with other people. So start that conversation and then give it the space to continue.
Vera-Lee, thanks again. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, James.
Thanks again to Vera-Lee. It was such an honor speaking with her. Amazing story, amazing podcast, and really great advice. Please do check the show notes to learn more about her and her impactful podcast. What were your takeaways from my conversation with Vera-Lee? I would love to hear what you got out of this episode. And the best way to do this is to leave a review on podchaser.com. Check the show notes for this, and feel free to make suggestions for what I can do to make this show even better for you. And remember to subscribe and follow to learn even more from other podcasters in future episodes. Thanks for stopping by.